So today we're talking about why your back hurts when you lift and how to fix it. So what today is not going to be is a tutorial on technique with your squat or your deadlift or anything like that. Instead, we're going to go through a really basic movement screen or a mobility screen, if you will, that's going to act as a precedent to the ability to lift well. So here's what I mean by that. You're going to be able to, at the end of this training, find out where you sit on a mobility spectrum, if you will. And then if you're scoring poorly on this, the things you can do to improve on that in order to lift more efficiently and have less accessory tone. So have your back really stay loose, if you will, after you lift, as opposed to over tightening from movement. So we'll start out with the screen itself. Very simple. So with that said, our screen is simple. We do it all laying on our back, and we're going to look at a couple things. So first things first, we're going to take a look at your hips. So we're looking for if you have effectively very anteriorly oriented hips and seeing if there's any compression happening at your glutes. So super easy screen here. You're simply going to lay on your back. You're going to have your legs flat out, and you're going to point your toes at the ceiling, and keeping your knees straight, you're going to move very, very slow and just come up as far as you can before the knee starts to bend or this down leg will start to roll. And we want to try to find that moment exactly where you start to miss. Something like that, right? And that's your score. Then we would want to look at the other side and do the same thing. Now, I'll show you from the top as well, just so you can see basically some of the deviations and things that we want to look for. And with that, again, it's pretty simple, just on my back here. And I'm going to go up as far as I can until that leg wants to move or my knee bends, right? This leg, you really be conscious of it. It's the one that most people tend to miss with, and they tend to kind of cheat and find ways around it. You want to find the moment where you start to make the error, not, an inch after, right? So we want to go up just slow, 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 as far as we can until that wants to move on us. So that's number one. Number two, you're going to set yourself up in that same supine position there. And you're going to look at your hip flexion. So we're taking a look at hip internal rotation with a straight leg raise. We're looking at hip external rotation at the pelvis with hip flexion. So quite simply, toes up at the ceiling, legs straight. We're still monitoring that down leg, and we're going to pull our knee towards our chest slowly, slowly until we either get a pinch in the front of the hip or until we can't go any further without the knee coming up on the down leg. Right. So for myself, I'm getting to a little past 90 degrees, come back down, and I would test the other side. Again, we're trying to look for our ability to keep ourselves in line. We don't want to tip out to the side at all. So that's it. Those are our two baseline tests that we want to look at. And in terms of values, what we're looking for here is frankly very simple. Number one is we're looking for the ability to get that straight leg raise to about 50 degrees. And our hip flexion, we want to be able to get to about 90 degrees. So what that's going to look like is you'd be here and you'd be able to go to a little bit past 45. That's your 50. If you can go further, that's great, but this is our minimum value. And our hip flexion, we want to be able to go to 90. If you can't get both of those, the drills we're going to talk about today apply to you. When you're getting that, you're going to have a lot of stiffness in your hips and you lose a lot of the function in your hips and the mobility and the movement, which is in turn going to make your low back and your knees and your ankles need to overwork and over stiffen to account for the lack of movement in the hips. So drill number one that you can do. This one's a very easy one. You can actually do it as a squat warm up because you can do it in a squat rack, right? So you'd want to get your safety for your squat, or you can even use the post for the squat. And I'll show you, we'll move the camera here in a moment, how you can actually just do this right off the rack itself. Yeah. And this will be probably about right there. So you're going to set yourself up with your squat rack, and you want to have your hands fairly low, probably about hip height. Okay. So from here, you're going to simply have your feet about hip width, toes forward, And you're gonna sit down into the bottom of a squat. Now you'll see here, I'm using this post to stop myself from completely falling backwards. And I'm just gonna sit passively. It does not matter if your back rounds at all, right? From there, you're just simply gonna think about breathing out until your sternum and your ribs drop. I'm not actively trying to round, I'm just letting it happen from the breath. And then as I breathe in, I'm trying to roll back and kind of shift weight onto my heels. And you'll see my pelvis actually rotates backwards. This should feel like a really nice lower back and maybe even a glute stretch. So it'll look something like this. So there, I'm breathing out, pause. And then as I breathe in, I'm gonna try to roll and really feel pressure on my heels without lifting my toes up. And so all we're doing here is we're just trying to work you further back and help you find your heels and rotate the pelvis back. This is taking you out of effectively like an anterior pelvic tilt, a term that most of you I'm sure have heard at some point, right? Very basic drill. Generally about 10 to 20 breaths on this is enough to see some improvement on those measurements. If that's not working, we'll generally want to go to a slightly different drill. This is where we can get into a 90-90 position. Now, I fully realize that these are far from the most stimulating exercises ever. But if you're at a point where, you've tried a lot of different stretching and mobility drills and tried correcting your form in your squats and your deadlift, and you're still getting this persistent tightness, it might be time to try something that you probably haven't done so far. And these positional drills that work on building sense and body awareness, along with a dedicated position, are really, really beneficial for that. So that would be the first one I'd try. If that's not really working for you, the second one that we can go through involves a wall, involves a towel, and we go into some internal rotation. So it'll look something like this. So we'd have a towel, or you could use a yoga block or rolled up sweater as just a spacer for your knees. You go onto your back so that your hips and knees are at about 90, and you want your feet wider than your knees are. So you'll see here, I'm almost a bit knock-kneed, right? For reference, my knees are kind of angled out like that, right? So what you're going to think about doing here is, as you breathe in, you're going to pull your heels into the heel cup of your shoe. You'll probably feel your hamstrings engage a bit here. And then as you breathe out, you're going to actively squeeze your knees into the towel. So it'll look like this. Inhale, heels into the heel cup. My hips will probably lift a little bit, and then I exhale until the chest drops. Squeeze the towel. Then inhale, heels to the heel cup, and then exhale like so. And again, aiming for about 10 to 15 breaths with that will do the trick, and then you can pretty much go about your normal squat warm-up. Now, the key to know if these exercises are for you, first and foremost, we want to look and make sure that the values you're scoring in that initial screen, while being very picky about the details, are 45 degrees or less with the straight leg raise and 90 degrees or less with the hip flexion. If they are, I'd recommend starting with that squat and then retesting. And if after 10 or 15 breaths, there's some improvement, I'd go back and probably do another round on it. If you found that, after a round and you're sure that you've done the details right and let your chest drop properly and you feel the heels and all that, you're not seeing any improvement, then I would go to the wall here and do this 90-90 with hip internal rotation, which would be really good at taking you out of that anterior tilt in that very, extended position. Now, if that didn't work, we'd probably want to change gears again and maybe look at, more of a mobility focused strategy. You're looking into some stretching and things like that. But this tends to work well for about 90% of people who don't score well with those initial tests. They've had some persistent back pain and they've already worked on trying to foam roll their hips or roll their back out more, or simply adjust their technique in the big lifts to work on, bracing better and all those things, right? I'd be curious to know if you've tried these out after you've had a chance to watch the training, and if so, how they worked for you. I've also got a free training on fixing butt wink in your squat, and if you'd like a copy of that, you can comment butt wink below. And our next free training is a free Q&A, and next week, actually next Thursday, October 27th. If you want access to that, you can comment Q&A below.